Welcome to the TNT Podcast, where we dive into the stories of career trailblazers and learn about their trials and triumphs along the way. I'm your host, Drew Hantla, and today we have Harrison Luganbill-Reuter, a senior design engineer based out of Colorado. On today's show, Harrison details his exposure to the automotive design industry and how he made his passion a reality. He explains the key elements to product design and the importance of teamwork throughout the entire process. Harrison takes us on a journey through his career development and outlines the flexibility the role provides and how he makes the most of it. He explains how AI is impacting the design industry currently and provides his take on where it may go. Follow along to hear more from Harrison. We hope you'll enjoy. Harrison, welcome to the show.
Hey man, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Hey man, can you give us a quick rundown of some of your backstory?
Kind of always been an automotive nerd, even back in high school. When I got my first car, I knew that was where I wanted to go. So even starting back in high school, I really tried to figure out, where can I go? How can I use this? How can I make money off of this? So I was in, welding class. I was in auto body shop in high school and wasn't really sure about college. Kind of liked working with my hands and whatnot, but eventually got convinced. Decided on Wichita State. It was close. They had, good engineering school. So I decided on mechanical engineering. Really wanted to, figure out how can I make the most money out of and the most impact out of working on cars, doing things like that. And I think the biggest seller for me actually was finding out about Wichita State's Formula SAE team. For anybody that's not aware, it's a collegiate design competition where group of students and you design, build, and race a Formula-style race car. You start from the ground up, pretty much have to build everything yourself. Maybe you got some suppliers or sponsors, and then you get to go to competition. And so for me, that was the biggest kind of hurdle or direction finder to point me in the right direction for the future. I did that. I was kind of an untraditional student. It took me a little while to get through school, mainly because I focused on the things that were fun, like building race cars, working with my hands. And, eventually it came down to, hey man, I gotta finish school. I gotta get out of here. I gotta do the right thing. Found myself working at a automotive repair shop. Got a lot of good experience there. Got an awesome opportunity to basically start from scratch and become a CNC programmer. And from CNC programmer, an engineering position opened up. And the last 2 years of school, I was an engineer for this company, which really allowed me to kind of hone in on those professional engineering skills. Then eventually I said, I need to find the next best thing. I wasn't in the automotive world. I hadn't achieved my goal yet. And I found my current company and made the jump pretty much right when I finished school. And I've been there for about 2.5 years now.
Can you kind of explain to us what your current role is and kind of what your day-to-day seems like?
So I'm the senior design engineer for a pretty small firm. We specialize in suspension and alignment components for pretty much any vehicle on the road today, from semis to daily driver commuter. My day-to-day, it varies wildly. I like to say that sometimes I'm the firefighter for those, mission-critical tasks that need to get done, need to get fixed. But then also I get to take a step back and really dig deep into some larger design projects that, require new technology, better testing, things like that. So I can really get a full mix from quality control to design engineering.
For those really wanting to pursue a route in STEM, but trying to figure out what exact direction they want to take it, can you kind of give us your perspective on why you chose the design role versus maybe another route that engineering allowed you to take?
Really, it's a matter of exposing yourself to different avenues of engineering. I got firsthand experience with machining, design work, with testing, all of the above from Formula SAE. It allowed me to test out these different approaches, these different roles. And it really kind of just clicked in my head that I was able to, sit down in front of the computer and get my ideas out into CAD.
So digging back into your comment about, kind of your goal position in the world of engineering, do you feel like now being in this kind of role, do you still feel like this is kind of your end goal, or where do you see yourself kind of shooting for the next step up?
Yeah, so I have been able to achieve a lot of stuff really rapidly, and it's been kind of a whirlwind to wrap your head around. I always like driving for the next best thing, if you will, or what's that next best responsibility you can take on. And so from here, there are all kinds of companies in the world, and let's say I want to go from a mom and pop shop to maybe a much larger company like an OEM automotive. That would be a reasonable jump. I could also make that switch over to the management track, which I know happens a lot as you start getting more experience. I think at least for the moment, I think I'm riding this wave of where I'm at and enjoying being able to do what I'm doing.
Some may feel like that they're unable to kind of find that dream position, if you will. Can you kind of help detail maybe how you put yourself in a position to find this role?
Yeah, I think it helps when you have some really good hobbies that you enjoy. I know some people don't like to mix hobbies and work together. But for me personally, I always had that hobby of cars and wrenching and whatnot. And so if you can find a hobby that you could turn into some kind of job opportunity, I think that's usually the best, especially if you enjoy it a lot. You can work with it every day. I think that applies everything from, hey, I enjoy video games. I'm going to become a video game designer, to someone like me who likes this and that and finds that role that kind of fills that.
With this blend of kind of your hobbies and your work, do you feel like that because you had more exposure to this field that maybe you experienced more hurdles along the way?
The more you know about a subject, the more you don't understand, or the more walls you need to tear down. I think the automotive world has plenty of those, but it's not the only thing. You could look at aerospace in the same light, where lots of red tape, lots of hurdles to jump. And I think every industry has those particular hurdles that just show up no matter what it is. And I think if you're passionate enough about what you're doing and you have, say, goals and aspirations for, say, a job title or a certain dollar amount, those hurdles start to become less of hurdles, but more of challenges to overcome. And I know that's how I continue to push myself to achieve more, is what's the next challenge? What's the next hurdle?
For those maybe wanting to hear more about what it was like starting out, and you've obviously been in this career path for a while, but can you kind of dig back into those first couple of months and kind of tell us kind of what that experience was like and what to kind of expect?
I honestly think the first couple months are some of the toughest. I think it's really common in a lot of STEM fields to suffer from that imposter syndrome, where you don't know what you don't know, and it can be really challenging to navigate that field, especially if you've started with a new company. You got to learn their rules, their processes, et cetera. And so I will say that for myself personally, suffering from that imposter syndrome was a really big challenge. And I think it's important to look back and remember, like, hey, I got through school. I did this. I am capable. I'm smart enough. Maybe I need to read some books, but I'm able to figure this problem out, and have some, a support structure to lift you up and, remind you why you're there and why you're doing what you're doing.
For people wanting an idea of kind of books to look for, do you have like a general genre to kind of keep your eye out for those wanting to learn more?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's enough literature out there on just about every special sector that you might be interested in. I know for me personally, there's plenty of suspension design books out there. Some are even referred to as the suspension Bibles, if you will. And so I think just poking around the internet and reading reviews on books that are within your field is some of the best stuff. And honestly even found that holding on to textbooks from college become more useful than I ever thought they would be. They've got obscure equations, they've got examples, because you don't need to remember everything. As long as you can remember how to find it, that's the real goal, right?
Now going to more of a career design position, do you feel like a majority of the market kind of leads you towards a niche route, or do you feel like that there's other routes that allow you to kind of have a diverse access to design engineering, if you will?
Yeah, so I think today's engineering programs usually do a really good job of making you a well-rounded engineer, if you will. So they give you the tools and the general exposure to a lot of different topics. I took a heat transfer class, and I can tell you that I have not looked at heat transfer in many years, but I could probably brush up on it if I needed to and do something simple, right? And so the nice thing about that is usually college sets you up to go into a niche role. And so you are able to take what you broadly learned and then be able to hyper focus, if you will. So, as an example, for me, a lot of things are statics and dynamics, and then, derivatives of that. And so exposure to my statics class has been paramount, because I can then take that and hyper focus it into making a real life product.
Do you feel like there's maybe 3 major classes for a student to focus on if they're going to pursue a career like this?
So every time we've interviewed somebody, I've always asked, how are you at statics? How are you at mechanics of materials? And how are you at dynamics? I think those are some of the 3 most core classes to understanding how materials work, how forces work, how they're transferred and generated. And so if you're looking at, I like to call them a hard part engineer, where you're designing fixtures or things that shouldn't move, or even if they are moving, they have to be certain strength. Those are the core competencies that I think somebody should really focus on. And thankfully, they're some of the most straightforward once you are able to wrap your head around the general principles of them.
For those who would be asked those exact questions in an interview, how do they know that they're up to date on the latest engineering techniques or trends? Is there a source that you use to ensure that you're most up to date that you can be?
So honestly, I feel browsing LinkedIn and certain articles on there, professional articles, give you kind of an insight into where the general, whether it's manufacturing technologies going, design technologies going. I think you can learn a lot from there. I know I've heard of design softwares that I've never heard of before, and I thought I knew them all. And so I think it's important to like you said, stay current and up to date. Now, if we take a look back at, say, statics, dynamics, mechanics of material, I think we're lucky enough to have a lot of that kind of set in stone. Where it gets kind of tricky is where you start talking about, say, new materials. How do we apply mechanics of materials to a 3D printed part? Do we have to treat it differently or not? So that's definitely some of the stuff that is worth staying up to date on.
How do you feel that you kind of explain this to your clients and to others not so detailed from an engineering perspective?
So I think they tell you, right, that you truly understand a subject when you're able to teach it. And I think that applies to talking to, say, a layperson, for instance. I think there are definitely ways to critique technical language or jargon, if you will, and explain it in such a way that somebody who's never experienced it can understand. And a lot of times I find that pictures are really helpful. So even drawing little pictures or overlays over Word documents and whatnot give you that opportunity to add another layer to your explanation. I do think that to be a well-rounded engineer, you do need to have that ability to be able to break down a complex subject and communicate it effectively.
For those possibly wanting to look at a path for their career, where do you feel like your development is currently as a senior design engineer, where you have the potential to grow, and then even to the next position, where do you feel like that path for you is right now?
Yeah, so the senior engineering role for me is a fairly new step. And so I know that for me, I'm ready to kind of ride out this level. And maybe I can move laterally from company to company, depending on whether your aspirations change from one subject matter to the other. I think titles are important, and experience is also equally important. So you can move around laterally. Like I had said before, I think once you've achieved enough experience in a senior engineering role, I definitely think that opens up the world for the management path, engineering management. Managing isn't for everybody, and I think that's why the world stays pretty well supplied with job opportunities for design engineers or engineers in general.
Do you feel like there's certain unique aspects or personalities to you that have kind of helped achieve the success that you have?
So I definitely think that having a passion in what you're doing and caring about what you're doing directly affects how good you are at it. I think that feeds into the age-old adage of attention to detail is everything. I think if you don't care about something, you're not going to pay attention to it. And in a fast-paced world where small mistakes mean large money and challenges, that attention to detail and that care and that passion is exceedingly important.
And on that note, how do you feel that you kind of overcome that stress and that obviously concern? Again, you're doing something you love. For you, how do you feel that you don't let that keep you down? How do you keep moving?
Yeah, I think, again, just reminding yourself of what you've achieved, what you've learned since, say, leaving school or since the last job, and knowing that you are only here because of what you've been able to do thus far. For me, large projects can be very daunting. There can be a lot of unknowns. There can be a lot of challenges to solve. But at the end, you apply the same basic principles of, this is what I know. This is what I know how to do. Then I'm going to execute all of the above. And typically that's going to result into a good end product. Stress management, of course, is always important. And I think that you have to have a good stress reduction method, whether that's a nice routine after work, definitely paying attention to your work-life balance for what fits your personal needs. Unfortunately, I don't think stress will ever not be in the work environment. So it's important to recognize it and manage it. And then again, always just remind yourself that you know the basics, and the basics are what got you there.
You touched on work-life balance there a minute. Could you detail out for us what you feel that your current work-life balance is as a design engineer, and kind of the maybe pros and cons of what you've experienced?
Yeah, so for me personally, work-life balance can be kind of more or less, depending on, what's going on at work that day, what's going on at home that day. I'm lucky to have the ability to kind of fluctuate as needed and choose what I'm able to do. Some places are just as flexible as that, and others aren't. And so I think that it's totally achievable to have a company support work-life balance full-heartedly and afford their employees with generous vacation time, paid days off just throughout the year, etc. So I think you really find that at the company level. And if you're lucky enough, you can find a company that you can kind of ebb and flow with as well.
For those looking for design firms, what are some top aspects that you believe makes a positive atmosphere for them to be in throughout their career?
I think this kind of changes depending on, the person, but I think personally, I'm going to be looking at what's my vacation package look like? Is there any opportunity for hybrid or remote work? Some people work better in the office, some at home. Personally, I appreciate office work. I think it is collaborative and important, especially if you're in a team environment. Being able to roll your chair back and say hello is nice. I also think it's important to look at a company's policies on further education. Do they offer paid classes or reimbursement for that? I know personally I've enjoyed that perk of my current company to further my knowledge on something, say that's a new technology or a tool that I'd really like to use in my day-to-day. And so forming kind of your own personal wish list, if you will, and then honing in on the companies that best offer those wish lists is something definitely to consider. I think size of a company should also be considered, that the dynamics between a 30-person versus a 100-person versus a 10,000-person employee company are drastically different. And I personally enjoy the smaller companies. I think they're a little bit more intimate and a little bit more connected between departments and roles.
Within the engineering department, do you feel it's beneficial to work as a team? And then in that case, what's kind of the workflow of your team?
Yeah, so I think teamwork is absolutely paramount. Pretty much no matter what you're working on. I think you could be the bee's knees of engineers and still get stumped on something. And it's always appreciated when you can bounce ideas off of a colleague or a group of colleagues to brainstorm ideas around a certain issue or anything. I know for our company, each engineer pretty much owns the totality of their design all the way through to release and production and whatnot. But that's not to say that we don't internally have many conversations about, hey, what's your opinion on the way this looks? Or how would you do this if you were doing it? A lot of times I find the best ideas on how to move forward come from collaboration. And that's why it's also important to look for a good team to try to fit into as well. Personalities, skill-based, etc.
Where do you see the world of design engineering going?
I think we'll always need engineers. And I think we will always be ebbing and flowing with technology as it influences different software, different design philosophies, etc. And, we can see that today with AI-powered design software that's enhancing the way we design. But I think at the end of the day, you still need an engineer there to determine the appropriate parameters, if you will, for that AI-driven software. And so, yeah, I think we'll always need design engineers. There's always going to be a need for some new product, whether that's a candy dispenser or a tie rod end for a vehicle. So
you don't see AI necessarily ending the world for design engineers. You kind of see it as maybe like a blended team, if you will, that they kind of work hand in hand.
Yeah, I think at the moment I see AI as a potential tool to improve our efficiency, our accuracy, etc. I'm not an AI expert, but I could see one day that, yeah, we say AI build this car, design this car. But I think we are a long way away from that. And even in that situation, I still think we would have engineers that would review that AI's work.
Then in regards to how AI is impacting today, do you currently utilize any AI software or aware of others that do? And then kind of just detail possibly kind of where it's at now.
Presently, I do not employ any AI-driven enhancements or software, but I do know that there are a lot of very fascinating tools in the design world, such as generative design, which allows you to design, much more organically shaped product that is ideal for that certain condition. And I know I would be interested in that. I think the challenges with some of the developments is we have lag times between traditional manufacturing methods and these new tools that are coming out. And there's always one that's going to be following the other. Sometimes they flip-flop. A great example is, we've seen a very steady increase and rise in, 3D printing of all types. And I think it has taken a while for us to understand the design limits and material limits of those. And I think we're starting to catch up. But, 3D printing has been around a lot longer than we've truly understood its capabilities, right?
In your role today, do you mostly stick to the design world, or is there other opportunities within your office that you are able to work with? And then can you kind of detail some of those for us?
Yeah, so I think some people might call it a benefit, others might call it a con, but I think a benefit of a smaller company is the need to wear multiple hats most of the time. So I know for myself, my main responsibility is being our senior design engineer. I'm also a test engineer in the sense that I need to design the test equipment for my new product. I need to orchestrate how that test equipment might work and how I'm going to run that test and then execute accordingly. I may also need to be a part of quality, dealing with challenges with nonconformities or guiding a supplier on the right path to fix an issue. So I very much appreciate the ability to wear multiple hats and not necessarily be stuck behind the computer all day, every day. I think being a design engineer affords you all kinds of options to still work with your hands, be up and out and about, and run different machines or tests and etc.
And you briefly touched on it there, but you do have exposure to your end customer, right? You're not just designing something and then it's going away for forever.
Yeah, so every company's set up a little differently. And again, one of the multiple hats that sometimes I'll need to wear is being that technical expert who faces the customer. Whether that's the customer's having a challenge with a certain product or walking them through a challenging install, or just listening to the customer in their needs and say, maybe we don't have a product that fits them, and that spurs into an idea for a new design. I enjoy being customer facing because you're able to see how are my designs being perceived directly, or how can I improve, how can I make better, and how can I solve somebody's problem.
I think that's a great thing to touch on, right? I think a lot of people, especially in the engineering world, are used to producing a product or solving an equation and handing it off, never having feedback coming back to them. Do you feel like that has been true kind of throughout most of your career, that you were able to get that feedback, or is that more so just that the recent role you're in has provided that?
So I think it is totally true that you can be a design engineer who wants to sit in their cube away from the end user and enjoy, the quiet and all of that. I think it doesn't matter what company you work for, you can probably always achieve that. I know that in my experience, whether it's been at my current place or even before, I was able to be customer facing. And sometimes it was a requirement to not only understand what the product needed to do, but also to just ensure that relationship stays informed, educated, and is able to, the whole project is able to move forward without much interruption or misinterpretation or anything like that.
Was that something that you had to reach out for with your companies that you've been with, or is that something that just kind of came naturally with the role that you were in?
Yeah, so I think, at least for me personally, my first job out of college kind of required it of me. I wouldn't be able to understand the project requirements if I didn't talk to the end customer. At my current role, I think I seek it out a little bit more, especially if there's a particularly challenging problem to solve or new product that I might be able to think of or design for. So I think it's very easy, though, for me to also step back from that and not be as customer facing. I kind of like to have a public appearance to the point where people might know me, but that I might be rather challenging to get a hold of.
To help further detail out what to kind of expect for this career moving forward, do you kind of have salary expectations that someone can be aware of each of the step of the way?
Yeah, so I think depending on the industry that you're interested in and the type of role you're able to secure kind of fresh out of college, I wouldn't think it's unreasonable to be somewhere in that $50,000 to $75,000 a year range. But that can quickly start increasing the more experience you get, especially if you are able to find a generous company that keeps you kind of on the float longer. You know, a lot of companies split them out, kind of engineer one, engineer two, or they split them out with, titles like my current place where we just have an engineer and then a senior engineer. And so I would expect that range for, your level one or your just general design engineer. I think as you start working up the levels, engineer two, engineer three, a senior role, that's when the top of it kind of starts ballooning pretty fast, especially if you're in a niche environment. And I think that 150 to 200,000 is not out of the realm of possibilities. Again, totally dependent on the industry and your years of experience, but it definitely does start ballooning pretty quickly.
In your experience, do you feel like there's a different ceiling, if you will, a salary ceiling of kind of maybe the niche field provides a higher or lower versus what's kind of your take of all the factors? Where do you see kind of like the scale, if you will?
Yeah, so I think when you're working for a smaller company, typically that comes with some intangible benefits and maybe some downsides of a slightly lower wage. I think some of those intangibles, such as closeness of relationships, vacation policies, lax work policies, kind of outweigh, say, making $10,000 less or something like that, right? I definitely see a lot of the larger salary caps in the space and the aerospace world. Here in Colorado, surprisingly, we have a lot of space startups who are doing some really very interesting projects and have great aspirations. They offer some very competitive and usually pretty high wages. I'd say the same thing for, military defense is probably where you'll find a lot of that. I think when you're in a niche environment, you kind of pigeonhole yourself into that niche environment. And so that's why it's important to pick something that you are passionate about and that you enjoy, because I think money is not everything. I think if you enjoy what you do, you're not chasing that super high big number. And, of course you want to get paid and make a lot of money, but it is something definitely to keep in mind as you're browsing and looking around. And for me personally, I found, the automotive world, the automotive design world, I would say it's pretty niche in Colorado, but it's not niche in the world. And you kind of, again, you have those intangibles of where you want to live and how you want to be perceived.
So building off that idea of different industries, do you then feel that as you progress and get that experience, it's easy to kind of transfer between the different industries if you do decide to change your mind?
So I think your root competencies, or your core competencies, if you will, apply to everything. And going back to what we were talking about earlier about specializing, you might be at a slight disadvantage switching, like doing a massive switch between industries. Like say, I'm an automotive engineer and I want to go work on nuclear power plants. You may have a learning curve that you need to overcome in order to work into that role, or you may find yourself having to take a slightly lower role and work yourself up within that nuclear engineering company. But I think the important thing to remember is there are always those core competencies that you should be good at, and those always transfer to pretty much every type of engineering you can imagine. And then it's just a matter of redefining what you honed in on as your specialty.
From a design perspective, what are some of your top 3 things to be aware of as you're designing products?
Safety is always number one. The amount of work that goes behind ensuring a product or a vehicle or something like that is safe far outweighs almost every other effort that one should do. And I think that probably applies across the industry. Safety is number one. I think following, not a close second, but a fairly close second, is always going to be cost, right? As a design engineer, you have the ability to design something that's incredibly expensive or something that is a third the cost, but it achieves the same safety and end result. And then I think also manufacturability is going to be, that third top item I would be considering. Again, just like with cost, you can design something that can't physically be made or is incredibly difficult to make. And typically there's always going to be a way around that. There's some specialties where, hey, it's going to be tough. That's just the way it needs to be. And I think learning the last two comes with experience. I think my experience, being a CNC programmer and working in a machine shop, and handling a lot of that stuff really gave me kind of a backdoor peek, if you will, into what's actually physically possible. How tight of a tolerance can I hold reliably? Questions like that. And then cost kind of plays in its experience, especially if you have exposure to any type of manufacturing, whether that's machining, casting, forging, 3D printing. You start to get an idea of how expensive is this process that I'm asking for, and how do I design around it to reduce that?
So with that idea of exposure and experience, do you feel like the route that you took in regards to doing the CNC side, doing the mechanic shop side, and obviously those other internships, would you do the same path over again? Or were there things that you would kind of change up?
So I don't think I would ever give up my hands-on experience with Formula SAE, and then kind of doing the quote-unquote nitty-gritty jobs of being a mechanic and CNC programmer, machinist stuff. I think for at least me personally, there was nothing necessarily wrong with that path, and I think it gave me a greater appreciation for the people downstream of where I ultimately want to be. I think if I were to do anything differently, I would have done everything faster, I think is the true answer. But I don't think there's really a problem with taking your time, getting through school at your own pace, and not being afraid to explore those hands-on opportunities and focus time onto those.
Of all the great things you've said today, is there something you want to reiterate as kind of a closing note, or is there an idea that maybe you haven't mentioned that you maybe want to say here?
I think the biggest thing for anyone who's thinking about starting school or in school, that it seems daunting and hard, but eventually you will persevere and get through it. I believe that the rewards at the end are well worth the pain and suffering of going through the school tests and arduous things. and you're probably on a great path for a rewarding and successful career. And if you're thinking about it, I implore you to take some tours of schools and manufacturing places and just kind of see if that's something you might want to explore and work on.
For some final thoughts for those wanting to jump into it right now, do you have any recommendations for items of additional education, whether it be online courses or books? Is there anything extra that someone can maybe do today to help kind of chase this career path?
I mean, this is going to sound so crazy, but I think YouTube and just general searches on the internet can be massively informative. I think whether you're trying to figure out a homework question or you're stuck on a design challenge at work, we have so much information at the tip of our fingers that it's foolish not to explore it. And just because you learn something off of YouTube doesn't mean that it's not, worthwhile and accurate. Run with the trust but verify type of mentality, right? But I think there are a lot of great resources out there on the internet, but also, books and just straight old-fashioned online, seminars and classes and things like that. And those online seminars typically are the ones that help you hyper-focus on that niche area that you might be wanting to focus on.
Are there any socials or websites that people can reach out to you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so you can search me up on LinkedIn, just my full name. I'd love to connect so we can chat if there's any questions there or, mysteries that you feel like need to be answered about what goes on behind being a design engineer. I'd love it and welcome it.
Awesome. We've loved having you on today. Thank you so much, Harrison.
Hey, it was awesome being here. I'm glad I was able to make it. This has been a real good time.
If you enjoyed today's episodes, then feel free to explore the rest of our offerings with the Brothers Frontier Studio. If you're not already, you can follow us at Brothers Frontier on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. With new shows every week and daily content on our socials, we hope you'll find what you're looking for. If you haven't already, please leave us your feedback with a comment or rating to let us know what you thought of today's episode. Thanks for listening. We hope to catch you on our next episode of the TNT Podcast. I'll see you guys later.